All right. Well, it is 4:30, so we may still have some people show up, but I just started the recording for the evening. I almost said good morning, good afternoon, good early evening, that is. It is December 10th, and we are here tonight to unpack Unit 3 of sixth grade Giants. And we've got a packed agenda tonight, so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to immediately turn it over to our three fantastic presenters. Carol, Andrea, and Sharon, and in no particular order. Later on, I'll say Sharon, Andrea, and Carol, so that they all get top billing at least once this evening. So Sharon, Carol, and Andrea, please take it away.
Okay, I'm Carol, and I will start us off with one PowerPoint that is an introduction to Unit 3. It could be you're finished with Unit 1, and maybe you're working on Unit 2, and now we're looking ahead to Unit 3. So let me hit my show. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
All right, thanks much. Unit 3 is it's looking at what I've started to call two powerful forces. The physical environment and its conditions like temperature and precipitation are forceful. Those conditions are forceful. They sometimes limit, they sometimes influence what people can do. The other powerful force is people, and we will see how powerful people are or are not. People do make modifications, they make changes to physical environments, and we're going to see some examples of that. I just wanted to give a little action and force to the physical environment and people, so we have those arrows. And I have a question for you. I'm going to show you slightly less than 2-minute video about hurricanes. And I'm wondering if this is something that will work if you do this virtually with students, or is this something that you would need to give them where they'd have to do it on their own? So let's give it a try, see what you think about this. So I'm wondering, is that something that you could show virtually to the students, or would we need to put that in a kind of a worksheet where they would do it on their own? Did you notice the 80-degree water? I don't know when Lake Michigan gets up to 80 degrees, but I kind of doubt that it does that. And did you notice the powerful forces? So that was the environment being powerful and forceful and having temperature conditions that really mattered. I'm going to do an even shorter video that was put out by PBS, and it's rather dramatic about what people do. Watch for the changes that people made, including their trash. So I think, again, is this something that you would do as a class, or that we should make as an individual activity? It's fast and dramatic, but to watch for the forceful things that people have done. And pretty soon we're going to go to lesson 1, and where we talk mainly about the forcefulness of the physical environment. Andrea and Sharon are going to help you focus on North America, which is the region that we focus on in lesson 1. And they'll show you some ways to talk about how Americans, especially in the late 1800s, had to really adjust to new environmental conditions. They couldn't do what they used to do. And so we will get you to that pretty soon. In lesson 2, for lesson 2 today, we're going to focus on resources. For example, oil resources. Who is lucky to have the geological conditions that give that part of the world oil resources? But the other side of the question is, how do people use the resources? What resources, for example, does our focus region of the world, Russia, have? And how do Russians use and exploit their resources? Lesson 3 is going to be what we get to in the end today. And it emphasizes the people part. How do people modify and change things? We will talk about briefly changes to water, land, plants, especially atmosphere. You are going to have to let me know. Andrea and Sharon, and I have really worked on talking about climate change without being insulting, trying to be respectful of differences of opinion. But I think when we talk about people modifying the environment, we have to deal with something called the greenhouse effect and rising temperatures. And it's important to say, well, how much greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, does the US emit? Does it emit more than other countries, less than other countries? So what's going on? And that's that. So I'll pass this over to Andrea and Sharon.
Okay, thanks, Carol. I'm going to share, I'll share my screen. Oh boy.
Are you able to overtake her, Andrea, or not?
I think so. Okay.
Good to go.
So then this is what, we're going to take a look at. The first question here is the compelling question, and that's the, overarching question and theme about human environment interaction and how people, their choices, both economically and politically, depend upon and can affect their environment, their conditions, geographic conditions that they're living in, or how they use those conditions and make connections. So the first lesson focuses mainly on the physical environment and how it would affect human activity. So we start out with let me go to present mode so it's a little bit bigger. We start out with a pre-test for kids, and the reason we do that is because if they're in Giants in the younger grades, like in 4th and 5th grade, then they may have had that opportunity to take a look at some of the different regions of the United States. So that's why we start out with a pre-test. And so, for instance, in Grand Haven, we know that students have gone through some of this information as far as getting an understanding of regions. And then we just add a little bit more information to it. So it's kind of fun to start out with, what do they know? Right now, everybody's teaching remotely in Grand Haven, but I've been teaching remotely all year. And so I've been changing or retrofitting some of the things that we have in Giants to make it more interactive for students at home. So this pre-test would include, let me go back. I give that to them as a Google slide, and then they can type in text boxes, like I did the example with few farms up here in the coldest region and that. And so they can put their information in and then turn it in and submit it electronically. Obviously, if you're in a classroom, you can just hand it out if you want to as paper and pencil, or you can still use the digital version. Then we go through the lesson and we start talking about it, because again, students may need that refresher. They may have never seen, this may be the first time they've seen it. So Sharon, do you want to talk about what that first line represents?
Yeah, I will just in a second, but this pretest can really make a difference on how much time you put into the presentation initially, or how quickly you can move through it. When I was teaching, I had a year of both. One group didn't know much about it. A few of the kids had it down, but the majority of them did not. The other group, they were all less than 50% of knowledge. So we took longer on it the second time through. So that pretest is really valuable to you, even though in Grand Haven, we use Giants from the beginning. So the first line we have them draw, as you can see, is from that northern tip of Alaska down to a tiny town, well, in a town called Barrow, and then it goes down, and you start showing them the position of where to put their line. So you can see it's hitting that western edge. Excuse me. And so once they get those 2 points, they draw the line, and that starts separating the west of the United States from the rest of the country. And I never went into a whole lot more about the features at this point. I waited until we got more into why is that line there. So it runs through the continent to the central of Mexico, and that's their first line that they have to memorize. And this is a PowerPoint that the closer they get and the more they understand the regions, the better they're going to become. So then we talk about the fact that that line is separating the mountain region of the west from the lowland of the east. And you can talk about the younger rocks, the higher lands, the lowlands, the flat plains. And in those discussions, find out what they already know or what they're already remembering from vocabulary. Depending on how you do your vocabulary, some of the kids will start to use the vocabulary right away.
Let's see. Yeah, and this is just to remind them to put the information on their map. There are a couple of, the PowerPoint that goes along with this in Giants has more detail. Mm-hmm. And it also talks about some examples or some exceptions to it. Excuse me, let me go back. So, I don't know if I went, here we go. So, we know that there's the Appalachian Mountain Range here in the east, but those are older mountains. Those are lower mountains, so to speak. And so again, it's a real general rule just to help get them thinking a little bit about the differences that occur and how you can keep that in mind, because it will have an impact on where people live and what they do. So then the second line goes, it's easy for the students, especially up here in Michigan, for them to recognize this, that this is a line that starts at the mountain line and extends, it's horizontal, extends, and it kind of skims over the top of the mitten there. And so they're pretty familiar with that, and they get pretty good at drawing that line in there. And then we talk about what that environment is like both above and below this line and what this line represents. So after you go through a few slides, they'll recognize that, yep, it gets pretty cold up here north of this line. And south of it, there tends to be more agriculture, more farmland, and this growing season is a lot longer than what appears up here. So there's some other information that goes along with it. And let's see. Oh, so that was a real simple line to draw horizontally, but actually, to get maybe a little bit more precise, so to speak, it actually kind of dips down into kind of halfway across the mitten, Michigan, and then it comes back up again. And so because of this, there is a little bit more of an agricultural region up here north of the line. But the kids will get it overall. And for the most part, I have them focus on just keeping, having a straight line. If they're a little bit more sophisticated, they can make that little bit of a dip there. But that also helps them to understand some of the changes that occur. Now, the third line.
I'm sorry, Andrea, but you can make the decision on if you want them to know that, just simple straight line,
Yeah.
if you want that sagging hammock effect. That's totally up to you. I also find out while we're doing this through the discussions, how many of the kids have traveled. And you'll find, at least I found in my classrooms, that some of the kids have traveled extensively in the United States. Some of them have not traveled in the United States, but they'll tell you everything about, Brazil and England and everything else. And some kids have never left their area. Maybe they're within a 30-mile radius of where they live and they've never been outside of that. So we tend to have all of that. And a lot of the extremes where the kids have never left the area and the kids that have traveled abroad, but not necessarily through the US. So as much as we might want to run through this quickly, it's really important that we don't.
You want to talk about the third line?
Sure. So are you going to put it up or?
I think the animation. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. So our third line runs due north from the southern tip of Texas up. And now we're starting to get that pie wedge of where we have really dry land that's hard to farm from our farming land, and our precipitation line is changing. And so we're able to start bringing in that precipitation piece again, talking about how does rain affect your land, and what happens if you don't have rain, what happens when you have more rain, to start the students realizing that if you cross a line over and now you're not getting as much rain, something's going to happen with the crops. And we've talked enough about that previously that they catch on pretty quickly. And anyone who's traveled, they're going to know a little bit more about our arid area of land and our non-arid.
Gets less precipitation. Yep.
Yeah.
This is a cool image that's also in the Giants PowerPoint. And again, it talks, we get these different ways of presenting that same information. And so now with this satellite image, we've superimposed the water line, so to speak, what divides the rainy east from the semi-arid west. And you can see that based on this, that also indicates population, that most of our population centers, heavily populated areas, are in that rainy east. So the students start to build that correlation between the environment and then where people live, and also what they do with it. There should be, this was another line. So notice again that, when we use these different varieties of maps and we include the information, it just reinforces it. And the kids really start to take a look at it, and then they can picture approximately where this line goes. When they're looking at any map of the United States, whether it be a climate map, a population map, economic activity map. But again, you can see that it definitely shows us what, what's occurring in the East. And then this also brings up a lot of discussion too when the kids see it, because they see that really deep purple and red over there in the Northwest. And so that always leads to a discussion about, that environment as well. So, with this line, like we said before with the mountain line, that there's always exceptions to it. It's not always completely dry in the west, but the majority of the area is dry, and just as the majority of the area in the east is wet.
I often remind them at that point of the sagging hammock line or the straight line. That, you know, we started looking at that short, straight, simple line, and then we went, well, actually, you know, there's a little bit of a variance. And so, you know, the Northwest is kind of in that same mode.
Mm-hmm. And so then the fourth line comes up, and this one, even with the first three, that gives a lot of information to the kids. And they start to practice with this, and they actually get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But the fourth line that we have here, it kind of splits the rainy east in half, the northern half and the southern half. And for this particular line, it indicates where they have a longer growing season south of the line and a shorter growing season where it, and the other thing that we look at is a way to explain, it is that people north of this line probably need to use their heat more than their air conditioning. And people that live south of this line most likely use their air conditioner more often than they would use heat. So again, it just helps them to understand a little bit better. But the effect of not only heavy precipitation, but also warmer temperatures definitely has an effect on what will grow in those areas. And so we know that north of this line, this was used heavily for corn. It seems to grow well. It needs a lot of rain. And but it also has a shorter growing season. And then we have the cotton region in the south, and we make reference to how that's connected to our history. And the PowerPoint that's in Giants, it goes into more detail. So we've just kind of pulled out a few slides here and there to give you examples of the information and how to present it to the students and what they should be drawing from it. Let's see. Now there's pine trees down there. Oh, so yeah, I think that was pretty much it on that section.
Yep.
So after they get a good review of North America and specifically the United States, then we go into, we're still in lesson 1, but we go into our next activity, and we call it What's in Your Wagon? And so again, it goes through this story and everything about a time period in the 1800s, that you're living in that time period, that you're in the East, and you want to move out west because you offered free land in that, and the accommodations for getting out there are difficult. So you only have one wagon. And so they have to decide, okay, what are you going to pack in your wagon? And what are you going to take out there with you? So kids, when I've done it in the classroom, kids get into small groups. There's a lot of different ways that you can set this up, whether you're in-person learning or you're distance learning. But again, they should be able to, kind of take some ownership of it, because it's more like an experience for them. So this gives us some of the background, and then they get this checklist, and also pulls in a little bit of math, right, Sharon?
Yeah.
You want to tell them about the checklist?
So once again, you can set this up however involved you want to get. I would have my students get together, and initially they had to, on their own, decide if they were moving west, what would they need to bring? And so they would go through and they would check off everything they felt they needed. And then after they had that issued, so that would be given like as a homework assignment right at the end of class. The next day when they came in, I would put them in small groups. And now the criteria begins to get a little bit more involved because as a group, they had to decide what could they carry in their wagon because they can only carry 900 pounds. And so you start finding out that students don't agree on what's important. Some of the students, if they are in a farming community or live on a small plot of land where they have even a large garden, they will grab the apple seeds, the corn seeds, some of those pieces. Some of them only want the possessions, you know, the bed frames and the saddles and the desks, and they want the things. They're not thinking about traveling, even though you can spell out you're taking everything you need for you and your family. So once they got into their small group, at the same time while they were talking, I would spin a die or roll a die with them, and it would determine how many people were in their group, how many of them were adults, and how many of them were children. So I brought in a mathematical aspect with this because that made a difference on how they were going to travel for the next few weeks. I had them travel all through lesson 3. So some people only did it as a short 1 week activity. I did it through the entire lesson. So if my lesson ran 3 weeks or my unit ran 3 weeks, we were doing it for 3 weeks. And I would just take out like the first 10 minutes of every class or the last 10, and we would do this portion of it. So they have to find 900 pounds, and you will find out that when they're given the sheet on how much all of this weighs, you have problems with addition. And so you need to have more than one student in the group doing the adding, because between multiplying and adding, they make errors. And then when you add in the special tools, they really start to argue. So you need to set a time limit, or I found I needed to, and just said, you know, you're going to have 20 minutes, and in that 20 minutes, you have to decide what's going to be in your wagon now. And I'd give them time to start, you know, trying to get it together, but some of my groups just couldn't come to a decision. So you've got to cut it off. And this is after you have someone who's supposedly leading the group. And I always had them record. So each group always had a running computer sheet, just a Google Doc, showing me exactly what they had, showing me the weight and who was in their group. Because as they traveled, things happen, and we need to know what's going on and what they have left. So then the last piece is they can take 2 things that they would want, but are not on the list above. And you have lots of issues there because they want to take modern devices. So you have to go back up to the little comment that we said, cell phones, flashlights, nylon rope had not been invented. And you really have to talk to them about that. And so my group got to where they struggled with those 2 items. They weren't sure what they should be taking. So you want to go to the next slide, Andrea?
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't have page 2 of that, which gives the weights of all of those items, but that is included in the lesson. I'll give it to you, Andrea.
So then, you know, you can do it a couple of different ways. I usually had the students, the groups roll the dice, and they had to, then they, it was kind of a random pick of which location they were going to, 1, 2, or 3. And so, you know, this is when things are starting to get a little bit more ramped up. And so I'm kind of thinking about how this is going to work for me digitally. I think I think I'll be able to do some of these activities like rolling the die and maybe, and then, you know, assigning that to a student or a group of students, for instance, their location and things like that. because again, I think it's part of it is that experience, and they're looking at, now they're starting to think about, oh, okay, so am I going to head a little further north? A lot of kids are asking questions. Maybe they know that what state that is. Maybe they're not quite sure. Same thing with the other couple of locations in that. And they also want to know what other groups are going in the same direction that they are as well. Here, you know, and again, this is the same map that we've been using before. So, so then, so just like any well-planned trip, things happen, right? And that's why, like Sharon had mentioned, that's why it sometimes takes a little while to get through this activity. But I think this is where the kids get that excitement, and it's kind of the unknown. So typically what we do, and I know we have a copy of this in the Giants lesson guide with—
We actually have cards with them on it now.
Yeah, and so you can like print them off, cut them apart, put them in a bucket or something. I used to have kids come up, one person from each group come up and randomly choose, and they would pull out something. So, you know, maybe somebody in the group pulled out this particular one, number 4, your horse lost a shoe. So when we worked on it, they immediately had to write in their social studies notebook, you know, what happened, right? Where did they, what was the event card, the journey card? And then they had to check their supplies, you know, see if they brought along extra horseshoes, just all that kind of stuff, and do a little bit of problem solving with it. So kind of gave a little bit of time for a group to kind of solve or resolve what was happening. There are some of these events, that these journey cards, where a group might have to make a decision. You know, a member. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of our cards says that someone in your group is bit by a snake, and the only doctor you're aware of is at the last fort you just passed, but you're going to lose 3 days of travel. And they're trying to reach their destination on time. So they have to make a decision as to what they're going to do, if they're going to go back and be 3 days behind everyone else traveling, or if they're going to take their chance that the person's going to stay alive, which is, you know, they roll on it or draw a card for the next couple of days. Every option has been put forth, including the one where this sweet little 6th grade girl said, we just have to shoot him so we can move on. And she was very serious. And she said, we just can't take the chance. And it was not my student, it was a colleague of ours. And they were not sure how to respond to her because they were so taken aback, because it was a quiet young girl who came up with that response. Well, they're just going to weigh us down. So be ready for anything on this.
Yeah, and a lot of kids will, you know, it all depends on what the makeup of your group and everything.
Right.
But some kids will recognize that, it, you know, in a way, it kind of harkens back to the Oregon Trail, and you know, there's you know, they may have had some experience with that. They, you know, I know there's some online games and things like that. So they do kind of get into it, and they start to see where, you know, where they're headed, what kind of consequences happen along the way. Is it a smooth traveling day, or, you know, are they robbed? Do they lose a wagon wheel? Whatever. But we do talk about that, you know, people that were heading out west were pretty much heading out into the unknown, so to speak. They didn't know what to expect. They may have had some preconceived notions, but they really had to think on their own. And again, they had to rely quite a bit on their environment as well as what they brought with them. So that's why, like we said, with the kids really get into it. It is a lot of fun.
And some of them, they find out that, you know, bringing grandma's, old desk just wasn't wise when they hit, a rough river and they've got to try to float their wagon across. So overall, the kids do enjoy it. They do help each other out. Like if someone loses a shoe, if there's a group traveling in the same area that has a shoe, I let them barter it so that they could get a shoe. But they also find out that sometimes like nobody brought a wagon wheel. And so now what are you going to do? So there's a real learning curve with the activity.
So in the end, after you've done this, for, a couple of days, could go into a week, whatever, then, eventually you have to kind of draw it to a close and you say, okay, everybody that was able to has made it to their destination. And so, let's see what you've come up to and what your new home is going to look like, your new neighborhood, your new surroundings are going to look like. And then we put this up. And then we start talking about, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you not see? And then that's when the kids start to realize that they may have overloaded themselves with some of the tools that, that they would be expecting to come into a forested area and, chop down some trees, build a home with it, use nails, things like that. And what they find is that they have made it beyond that water line, beyond into the semi-arid West. And there is some rain there, it grows the grasses and that, but there is not enough rain for the trees and forested areas. So what they left behind is now a memory, and now they have to deal with what's right in front of them. And that really, we talk about it, it's culture shock is what it is. And so they were expecting something totally different. And now they're recognizing that everything they packed, or many of the items that they have packed may not work, or may not work for the original purpose they thought they were bringing it for. So the other presentations, PowerPoints that are with this, they go into, there's some beautiful pictures and goes into more detail about what did the pioneers do, how did they survive, what did they grow, or what did they build their homes out of, and they're pretty amazed at how much the pioneers, used their their problem-solving skills to figure out and use what's in their environment. And that goes back to, what we said at the beginning of this, how do the physical environment conditions affect people's activities? Well, it changes the type of home that they're going to live in now. And maybe what they would have expected that they were going to do as far as economic activity, and they have to kind of readjust, reevaluate, and move forward from that. But yeah, it is. It's one of the ones that they talk about all year that they really enjoy. So that was a fun one. So then after we're done with this, then we go into, we start looking at the climate conditions in the United States here. And we do have the clickable map. There's several clickable maps in this unit. We have North America clickable map, but we also have one of the United States. And so we do have them go through and they put in some of the different crops that are grown and where they're grown. And then we also look at the water balance. And on top of that, we can also look at the growing season and that. So then they start to recognize that there are some distinct crops that grow in certain areas, and what kind of economic activity that lends itself to for them. So this is a nice little short activity. They talk about, they answer questions like which crop can farmers grow in the longest growing season? Which can they grow, which crop can the farmers grow where there is less water? And then what conditions support large urban areas? So if we look at metro areas, those are the larger cities there. And so then they start to look at patterns that occur. Sort of reminds me of like that satellite image that we looked at earlier. Where is the population centers in relation to the physical environment, the rainy east and the semi-arid west? So that was, trying to think if there was anything else with that one. Oh, so then when they get done with that, let me go back to our slide. Then we look at climographs. You want to talk about that, Sharon?
Yeah, before I go into climographs, I want to bring in the literature piece.
Oh, okay, yep.
So when you're doing the pack your wagon activity, it's a really good time to begin working with the 2 books, or at least one book that we suggest. One is My Antonia, and this book, there's actually just a few, not many, but a few passages that we reference, and they're good descriptive pieces. If you don't want to try and get 2 books done, our recommendation is Pioneer Girl. It's based on a true story. It is by Andrea Warren, and Pioneer Girl is an easy read. Most of the chapters are about 6 pages, fairly large print, so it goes along very easy. But this is talking about a family who chooses to move from Missouri out west. And the reason being is he wants his own land, and his parents have raised him to want more than what they have, which is probably an adage that was very, I'll say popular, but well known, that typically generations want their children to do better than they had. And many of these were immigrants coming in, and so either they brought their families and were raising them, or they are first generation in the US. And so with the ability of going for free land, they move out west. This takes them through trials and tribulations. They're able to farm, and they experience the Dust Bowl. The girl that is basically writing this talks about before she was born was the grasshopper infestation. They lived through what appears to be a tornado. And she talks about, what it was like trying to, her father said, to get to the cellar, and she was still closing the windows and the doors, and then was struggling to be able to move against the wind to get to the cellar. Just as with the other literature pieces we do have a sheet that will tell you what's coming in the chapter. I have so many tabs at the top of mine, but each chapter focuses on something different. And we have questions that you can use as prompts if you choose. But if nothing else, this really gives the students a good background as to what life really was like. And what they'll find out is there was as much inequity then as there is now between families. And it had to do with who you were, where you were from, because certain people from countries in the old country or the old world were not considered as high class as others. And so there's a whole lot of information in this book. And the book is, typically you can find it for about $6. But it's a fairly easy read. You'd easily be able to get through it during the Unit 3. So Andrea, are you out?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you out, or do you have the continued slides?
I've got the temperature slides, the climograph slides.
Okay, then can you go ahead then? Are you clicking or am I?
I think I am. I'm the one sharing it.
Okay. So this is simply talking about precipitation conditions again. We're going to look at the rainy east, the semi-arid west.
And the previous one was the temperature,
Oh, okay.
you know, so yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at temperature and precipitation. Temperature, the kids get a whole lot quicker. At least I found they did, because we've talked about it in all of our previous lessons. So they understand that the temperature makes a difference with growth of products and what kind of natural resources you end up having as far as trees and greenery. When you get to precipitation, they have a little bit harder time knowing. And what I have found is, because we now water our plants and our farms, they don't often connect drier conditions causing a real problem with growth of crops. And, you know, you kind of have to remind them early on, they didn't have the use of pumped water and sprinkler systems. So you do need to talk to them about that. Can you click me forward, Andrea?
Sure.
Thanks.
So precipitation. So then they eventually get to this activity.
Mm-hmm. So in the precipitation, you want them to, you may have possibly wanted to do a review of climographs if your students were not real if they didn't understand them well initially. But we chose 4 cities. We talk about the climographs, what they stand for, what they look like. And you need to remind them of the temperatures that they're talking about and what the precipitation is in each area. And so then when they're looking at the graphs, it's fairly easy to get them to understand that the cities that are near water, bodies of water, tend to have the higher precipitation. And the more they look at a map and understand that, it makes it easier for them to understand also why our population settles where it does. And, you know, you can always go back to that map and once again, show where the majority of our population is.
Okay. Oh, so that was, I'm trying to think if there was anything else that we had in lesson 1. I think that was pretty much the rest of that. Carol, did you have anything else to add to lesson 1 before we go on to 2?
Not sure Carol's with us.
I am.
Oh, okay.
You can go on now to lesson 2. We're ahead, a little teeny bit ahead of schedule, which is great.
I guess I'll just ask real quick, does anybody have any questions about that information from lesson 1 about the regions in North America and the climate or the conditions in the United States and the simulation?
We're not going through each and every lesson. We're kind of giving you the high points and the focus of what we're doing. Any questions at all? I think then we're good to move on to lesson 2.
Okay, and so then lesson 2, we get into resources, natural resources. And, you know, for our students, we go through and we define resources. We have a short activity that we work on about Michigan resources. It always helps to start with what they know. And so we use that to help them, you know, get their mind set in the right direction. And then we get into some of the natural resources around the world. And our goal is to try to get kids to understand that natural resources that especially that humans use and those extracted from the earth, and that they're not evenly distributed, and not everybody or every country has the same amount of resources, natural resources, nor do they have the same type of natural resources. So it's kind of like, what do you have and what can you use, and you know, what do you do with it, so to speak. So this is after we do the Michigan resources, then we talk about oil and metals, because that's one of the obviously one of the really important resources that we use here in the US especially. And so we go through and talk about who's got the oil and who uses oil, who wants the oil. And so then this eventually we get to, and it's a short little PowerPoint, and it's a world map. Notice again that it's a little bit different focus of it. Kids are used to usually North America being in the center, or maybe even Africa being in the center of the map. So this is just kind of a slight shift or look at the world map. And again, we're looking at who produces it and who uses it. So we do have some of these little dash lines in that they represent the lines that separate, fault lines and that separate them. And then we've got some circles. So I think the next slide I actually take, yeah, I'm hoping it'll take you to, yep, digital notebook. So, you know, in the past, I've printed this off and handed it out to kids. And now I'm going to be pushing it out digitally. And so we have some things that they need to work on and what they need to take a look at. So we have the solid black circles are going to be represent the oil that's produced. And then the open circles, or the light colored circles, are going to be the oil that is used, how much oil is used in that region. So I think I can advance it, yeah. So what they have to do is take this data, and they're going to use these circles and click and drag them. So again, we're looking for ways that we can, whether you're using this digitally in a classroom with face-to-face learning, or you're doing it remotely, we still want to get that student engagement and increase it as much as we can. So for instance, Europe produces 2 billion barrels of oil or petroleum a year. And so each one of those dark circles represents 1 billion. So the kids will, whoops, I want to go back. Oh, I wonder why it's not letting me go back. Let me go back up here. And I know I can click on them. Yeah, because I can click them and move them. And I could bring that circle up there, that dark circle up there for Europe. Oh, I don't want to, yikes. You got to be really careful with it. So then they're going to click and drag. And they put a couple of dark circles up there for Europe, but then they have to fit 7 of the light colored circles. And again, doing the same thing, they're going to do that with Europe, with, let's see if I can make it bigger now so we can see it, with the Middle East, This, when they do the Middle East, whether they're drawing it by hand or they are doing it digitally, it's obviously, this is a very small area. It's a small region, part of the world. And yet they have a lot of oil or petroleum. So they have to get 9 of those dark circles in there. And then they use only 2. Now, when I did this in the classroom previously, I had some, you can use different things. I think when Phil first showed us this, I think we used poker chips or something.
Yeah.
Some kind of manipulative, so we could, on a desk map of a world map, so we could stack them up and you could see, be like a 3-dimensional, who's got the, who's producing the oil and who's using the oil. Last year, or excuse me, I think it was 2 years ago. Yeah, I had a student that was, he was, his sight was impaired, and he read Braille, and he was a part of our classroom, and especially in social studies and that. And so we had these little cubes, Unifix cubes, kind of like oversized Legos or whatever. And that, you can stick them together and they don't come apart. And we had put little stickers on his, on those Unifix cubes, and he worked with a partner. And so he was in charge of reading, or his partner read the data to him and everything. And then he had to build and stack up how many barrels of oil that were being produced in Europe. And then his world map also had like these wiki sticks that it was gave it a little bit of texture so he could understand and identify the different locations. And then he also had Braille labels that were attached. So he was able to locate Europe. And then he stacked a couple of the Unifix cubes on. He knew that they were the ones to represent producing oil. And then he stacked on 7 of a different set of Unifix cubes that had a different set of stickers on them, Braille stickers on them, and he was able to stack those up. So that was a great opportunity for him to be hands-on and involved in it, and very independent in what he was doing. He worked with a partner, but I have to say, he did most of the work himself. So that was a fun activity. And that's why, like I said, whether there's so many different ways to do this in a classroom. And quite honestly, you can think about what would be the possibilities with a student that's at home. I know not everybody has that function of printing, but if a student is able to print a world map, and then they have something, maybe they have a set of Legos at home and they can stack them up to represent the data.
Even Cheerios would work.
Yeah. And then you can maybe eat them.
Yeah. Andrea, we've got a question about click and drag. They've tried it on Canvas and in Google, and they're not having success. Can you help address that?
One of the first things that you have to do with any of the maps that I push out for my students, or actually like today, I was working on a math assignment with kids. Whatever the slide starts out as, like for instance, most of these are PowerPoints. So I make a copy of the PowerPoint, and I make a copy of it and I save it as a Google slide. I have to make sure it saves as a Google slide. That way I can manipulate it and do something to it. I'm trying to think if I can exit my screen, because I might have closed. Oops. I want to exit full screen. I might have closed up some of my tabs. But I have, for instance, my students were working on the China work maps. And just as a quick example, because I just went through this with a student earlier. oh, I still have my stuff on there. So this was a blank map, and we needed to add some information about the population density where there were large groups of people living in China. So it's a Google slide. So that's the first thing I had to do. And then I can just clear some of this stuff out. Hit delete. But if I want to put something like that, like a shape in there, which is usually easy to do when you're creating something that's going to cover a large area, instead of a population density map with a bunch of little tiny dots, I have them look at and find out where there is a, more densely populated area, concentration of people, like near major urban cities and urban areas. Sometimes I tell them it's just easier to see, to fill it in with a color. And then you can move that around. You can make it as big or as small as you want it to. This wavy line, we went over here and used the scribble, and we can create another line, if we're indicating something else, make it thicker so it's, again, shows up a little bit more. Maybe you want to make it a different color, so it really draws attention, whatever. So, and then if they have to label anything, then they just put in like a text box. This is the dry region, they can make that bigger. So I found through trial and error is that when I push these out to kids through Google Classroom, if I have not turned the PowerPoint into a Google slide, because they're opening it up through Chromebook, then they can't edit it, or they can't add information to it. So that's the biggest hang up there. So once you do that, you're in pretty good shape. The other thing is, Carol and Sharon and I, and with the help of Dave also, we figured out ways that we can we can protect the map so the kids can't destroy it or remove something from it or remove something from a worksheet. So we set it up as a background so that no matter how much I add to this map or how much I want to take away from it, I can't destroy the original map. I can't move these text boxes or anything like that because that was, it's in the background. And so with it being embedded like that, that's why the kids they are able to add information. They can add pictures, they can add, words, text boxes, shapes, lines, that kind of thing. Some of it might be a little bit clunky, but I'm going to tell you, the kids are pretty good with it, especially with the hand-eye coordination to do that.
Kathy is saying thank you for all the information. So I read your note real quick, Kathy. Are you not able to do this in Canvas?
No, I have not been able to do it in Canvas, but I haven't been able to do very much in Canvas. The district bought Canvas. The administrators who don't have to use it love Canvas. But it sounds like the trick here is to just send them back to Google Classroom and have them do it on, although they discourage us from that. They want everything in one place. So no, they haven't been able to do it in Canvas.
Okay.
So.
Well, hopefully this can help you move forward with it.
Right. We'll just do it in Google Classroom until I get caught again. So.
Well, and yeah. Kathy, the workaround for that is probably to have them working out of Canvas, but you're linking all of that stuff out to a Google Drive with that same naming convention we figured out of copy at the end, and then it forces them to make a copy. The extra step then becomes sharing it back with you as the teacher to grade it, but that can be a way that you can still utilize that functionality of Google while in Canvas if it's not meeting your needs, which is my nice way of saying I agree with you.
You're much nicer than I am. Thank you.
So sorry, Andrea, for the.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's interesting to think about some of the different things. So Kathy, can you use Google Forms in Canvas?
Yes, I can use Google Forms in Canvas. It shoots them out to Google.
Okay.
But this I have not been able to do. I tried, we've tried a couple of them. And frankly, I tell the kids, I don't know how to do this. Let's see if you can help me figure it out. And if
Right.
they tell me it can't be done, I trust them on that one. They're better at it than I am.
Oh yeah, I mean, as soon as like I said, one time I put out a map and it was still in the PowerPoint format, and then they were not able to add any information. Trust me.
Yes,
I got emails right away from kids.
yes.
I can't
They
do
know.
anything on the map. So
So I know now, it saves me an awful lot of time just to know that it's not possible.
yeah.
Well, and I think too, like he said, if you can change it to the slide first and then just
Right.
attach, if you're able to attach links. I'm not sure because we're using
Yes, I can.
we're
I
using
can
something
attach
else.
links.
Because we're using Buzz, but the same kind of thing, like if I can attach a link that says make a copy, then I can give it to them to work
Yep.
That way.
Yep. Okay. So this was, that was the, that was the map that the kids were working with and everything. And they've got some questions to answer about it. Basically what it is we want, this was an additional one, but we want them to just experience or see one way or another. And you can really think of, like I said, the different ways, whether you're in person or you're remote, how they can start to see that there are places in the world that have an overabundance of petroleum, and then there are places in the world that have a really big appetite for it. And so again, those are some of the things that they get from that. Let's see. And so then Carol's going to talk about some of the other natural resources. So I will stop sharing, Carol, and I'll give it to you.
And you'll need to tell me if you actually see anything.
We can see what you're doing.
Oh, good. Okay. And just real quickly, oil is just something we depend on. We noticed that Europe didn't produce very much and liked to use a lot more than it produced. I have a few pictures of what a oil well looks like, and that has been drilled down into the earth to bring the oil up. Something that the kids are used to looking at, the gas station. You could, if you want, just real quickly, you could say, well, here are regions of the world. Which do you think produces the most? This is a way easier introduction to what Andrea was sharing with you. And the revelation is, can you see the middle that Andrea was pointing at? How does North America, where we live, how do we luck out with having oil and producing oil? And you might notice, okay, Middle East is first with 28. North America is second with 21 million barrels per day produced. Who's third? Can you tell? That's Russia combined with Central Asia. So we have first, second, and third in the world. These are really lucky world regions. Notice Europe is not so lucky. And you might ask, what is Europe going to do about this? Let's see. It will have to buy. Okay, so that was just nosing into an easier version. Let me take you next to, let's see, minerals. Haha. Who is lucky? Gets the diamonds, gets the gold, gets the oil. And we'll show this to you. Which parts of the world are lucky and have diamond mines, metal mines. Those metal mines could be a great variety of things, anything from gold to copper to zinc. Who's really lucky and has gas and oil in their region? It all depends on what kind of mountains you have. Diamonds tend to occur in one type of mountains, very old, worn down mountains. Metals like gold, copper, silver tend to occur in another type of mountains, the young mountains that are still very high and not worn down. We have some unusual names, and Sharon and Andrea will have to tell you how well these go across. Young Cordilleras, Spanish, are the young mountains, which is pretty good because we can remember that South America's high mountains, Spanish, spoken there, are blessed with metals like gold, copper, silver. And then we have the old worn down mountains that don't even look a whole lot like mountains anymore, and they are blessed with diamonds. The symbols on here, the really dark, kind of elongated symbols, I can point to them. The elongated symbols are the young, very high mountains, the kind of blobby, browner, or the old worn down mountains, the cratons. Just a new word. And look where the diamonds are. Where those ancient cratons, like in northern Canada, they are awfully rocky places and not great places for farming, both because of cold and rocky infertile soils. But they are great places to find diamonds and other gemstones. Metals. Can you see the mountains of South America in the patterns of where metals like gold, silver, and copper are? Again, and look how North America is blessed with its young mountains to have the metals. Parts of Africa, parts of Asia also are blessed in this way. And then the big question comes, who is lucky and gets the fossil fuels? Now, these fossil fuels, they can be oil that you pump out of the ground. They can be coal that you dig out of the ground. They can be gas that is also pumped out of deep in the ground. Just a reminder, we depend on all of these to heat our homes, to drive our cars, to have the electricity so we can Zoom with each other. And where, these major hint, these are not in the young Cordilleras. They are not in the ancient cratons. They are in between. Notice how the fossil fuels are in between. They're not in either kind of mountains. How does North America do? North America is really lucky. It has the diamond, ancient mountains. It has the young mountains for the metals, and it has the places in between. This is just to say we can't do a whole lot about our geology, and some places are luckier than others. This is an example of a fabulous Wyoming coal mine. There's like hundreds of feet deep of coal in the in-between place between the two kinds of mountains. And we'd like kids to remember that you luck out with different kinds of geology and what those lucky kinds of geology are. So that one's that. Okay, I am going to take you to Russia. Our lesson 2 talks about resources. Russia is a resource-rich country, partly because Russia is enormous. And let me get this going. This is a CIA map of Russia. You can see where Russia is. It extends touching parts of Europe and then way over into Asia. You can see lots of countries that are smaller that are its neighbors. Inside, well, here's another way, a simpler way of looking at Russia on this is one of the layers in the clickable map. Russia extends across part of Europe and then all the way over to the east in Asia. It's surrounded by many other smaller countries. I put some of the names on there. China is important, China is large, but no other country in the world is as big as Russia. Inside Russia, being blessed with a huge area, you get a great variety of young mountains and old mountains and in between the two. And so it's blessed. And very important to its economy is it has oil and gas regions. Remember that we saw that it was the third largest producer. And poor Europe next door didn't produce very much. Consequently, you see these pipelines coming out of Russia, carrying especially natural gas. They all have winter, just like we have winter, if not worse than we have winter. And they really like to heat their houses in winter. So Europe is getting a great deal of fossil fuels, especially natural gas, from Russia. Russia is also rich in mineral resources, and the clickable map about Russia uses X's to show you how scattered minerals are throughout this huge country. Russia is the top producer of gold, nickel, cobalt, and platinum. And this is very important to Russian economy, as is its production of natural gas. I just thought it was kind of cool. There is a place, and I have a reading, it's 1 page long on Wikipedia that students can go to, about a place called Norilsk. And that is a pit that is more than a mile wide at the top and more than a quarter mile deep. And 3,000 workers are employed there to get the diamonds out of the ground. Russia has produced about 25% of the world's diamonds. What I'm going to show you next are some challenges. Notice that there's a layer on the clickable map that has shaded. A huge portion of Russia is shaded blue. And that's the permafrost region. And I'll let you think while I change to the different presentation, I'll let you think about what you think permafrost means. It's cold. Well, Russia is close to the North Pole, and we're going to see pretty soon it's a lot closer. Almost all of Russia is a lot closer to the North Pole than any part of the United States is. I don't know if you remember back in Unit 1 when we talked about ancient cities and we had a map of the average annual temperature. It's just terrible in the northern part of Russia that is closer to the North Pole. Notice in Africa, the average annual temperature is 81 degrees. And then you go to Italy, the average annual temperature is 60 degrees, but you go to northern Russia and the average annual temperature is 18 degrees. It's like, brr, this is just a cold, cold place. If we look at, can you find in the blue in here in the corner, can you find Michigan? This is where Michigan is in relationship to the North Pole. All these cold states that I have lived in, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, they all have cold winters. Every single one of them is south of, warmer than almost every part of Russia. The blue area is the permafrost region. We don't have permafrost in Michigan, thank goodness. Permafrost are soils that, starting from the top and going deep, deep, deep into the soils, the permafrost soils remain frozen during the whole year. They're frozen in summer still. Now, what we've seen is that permafrost soils deep will stay frozen, but the top couple inches, 6 inches, may melt for a couple months in the summertime. There's a bit of a problem when it melts, and we'll see that. Can you see that this is the top that has melted in the summertime, but all the rest of this permafrost soil is still frozen in summertime? And what you get in summertime is the melting top slips and slides and slumps. And you might imagine that this is a pretty difficult place to build houses on. You have to go to a lot of extra effort to put pilings for your road or your house or your railroad so that your house and your road and your railroad are sitting on something that will stay put when the top layer melts for a couple months in summertime. What does permafrost cause people to do in Russia? Well, they can only grow crops like corn in a small corner of Russia. It's possible in summertime to get a little tiny garden plot in the permafrost area, but really to do any serious farming, you cannot do it in permafrost. The high population areas where we have each of those dots represents 2 million people, except for a few major cities in the permafrost region. Most Russians prefer to live in the non-permafrost, in the warmer areas. Major cities are connected by railroads. Russia did want to connect, just like we want to connect both sides, east and west of our country. The US, Russia wants to connect its eastern side. The capital is at the Star, Moscow is here. It wanted to connect its entire country with a major railroad, but noticed how that railroad tried to stay out of permafrost and in the non-permafrost area. And then last, as you might imagine, and as you could tell from the population map, very few people wanted to work in the mines that are out in the permafrost. This was just not the most desirable place to have a job. And I'd like you to look at what's written in red. Since 1917, Russia has had communist governments, and for a chunk of that time, coming toward present, but probably not as much in present, Russia forced people to work in the cold permafrost areas. I have relatives I never met because my grandma and grandpa moved out of this part of Russia in 1912. They left, but they left all their relatives behind, and their relatives were all sent to work in the permafrost. Basically, lots of prisoners, people who disagreed with the government, people who were not the right ethnicity were forced to work in the coldest mine areas. Can you see the line on there that is the Arctic Circle? I have a place 5 on there. Norilsk is where the diamond mine is. I'm going to show you a teeny bit about Krasnoyarsk later. But one of the literature connections called The Impossible Journey that we can point you to for about Russia talks about children who start out in Moscow and are trying to get to place 5 because that's where their parents were sent, because their parents were the wrong political party. Their parents were being punished for talking against the communist government. So this is, but apart from that, we do try to have the kids, look at these and the students look at these and look back and say, well, what's the problem with permafrost? How does that affect locations of cropland, cities, transportation? Yes, Russia has resources, but how do you extract those resources? Just a tiny bit about temperature, and we'll end up pretty soon here. I will stop with Krasnoyarsk. I have a worksheet that refers students out to just a couple page Wikipedia article, and they get to look at the temperatures in Krasnoyarsk. Being in the middle of Russia, being in the middle of a continent is a really, really cold place to be. And it is just unbelievable that an average day in February in Krasnoyarsk is 50 degrees below zero, minus 50 degrees. Some of the articles that the students they're one-page articles in Wikipedia. The students can read about how even in the 1970s, car tires in the cold temperatures of winters just shattered. This is a terrible place. So let me get out of this. So I think, Andrea, are you going to, let me just check. Or maybe Sharon, were you going to talk any more about temperature or literature?
Well, I held up the book that when you mentioned Impossible Journey by Gloria Wellen, and it's a great book, but it is difficult to get, and unfortunately, we had a hard time finding it as well. We were able to get some old copies and that, but if you can get your hands on it, it's a great story, and it's like Carol said, the family is separated. The parents are sent off to Siberia, and these 2 kids, this young girl and boy, they venture off on their own to try to reunite with them. So you've got that problem, and on top of it, it's like these very hostile climate conditions for them as well. So it's kind of neat to, if you have the time and you can put that, incorporate that into your social studies classroom, or if you have like a homeroom time or something like that, it's a great story. There's a newer book, or it's easier to get a hold of, The Endless Step. Very similar to it, similar situation, shortly after World War II, and Russia takes over, and they are sending people to Siberia that were dissidents or the wrong group and that. And again, this is where the whole family goes into exile in that. And so, I've talked about hardships. I mean, just trying to live in that permafrost area. You talk about some of the hardest things, conditions. And so again, it kind of drives home that whole concept of, how do people interact with their environment? How do they modify their environment? How does their environment change or modify them and their activities because of the conditions there? But those were real quick, but both of those are in the lesson guide, along with some more additional information. So,
Okay, thank you. Let's take a break and gather back together just slightly after 6:15. And if you have any questions, we can take them then. And then after 6:15, we'll proceed to lesson 3, where we talk about what people do to environments. People are powerful. And we will get into, you have to let me know if we're being too controversial about climate change. Okay.
Carol, I'm going to take over and share my screen. Okay. And let's see. That'll be it. Okay, so our third lesson in Unit 3 about human-environment interaction, we take a closer look at how humans modify or change their environment, their physical environment. And, one of the things that we stress with this is that it's not always negative. It's not always a negative effect in that. So it's easy to point to examples, different ways that humans have modified the environment for, made it worse, obviously. But then we also need to balance that out. So it's something we try to keep in mind as we work our way through it. So one of the first things that we do is we actually take a look at the earth, the environment, and we divide it up into 4 spheres that humans have some kind of effect on, or the sphere has an effect on humans. The science teachers love this. So in fact, I think they use it sometimes in their classrooms as well, but it doesn't hurt for them to hear it or see it again, whatever. But the first thing we have kids do, this is like a presentation, and then it's the same activity that you can push out to kids in the classroom. When I've done it with notebook, in their old notebooks or their paper notebooks and colored pencils and all that good stuff. So now that we're in the digital age of everything, we have to think that way. So the first thing we have them do is just draw a real simple circle. It could be on a Google slide, whatever drawing program that you can use that works best for your students. And again, you can also have them do it by hand and on a piece of paper and send a picture of it or whatever. but the first thing we do is we take a look at the lithosphere, and that ends up being the Earth's surface. You know, it's the soil, the rocks, all that good stuff. So I have them sketch out just a real simple outline of, usually we do the, you know, North America and South America continent. Some kids do, you know, Africa. Not too many choose to sketch out Asia or Australia, but you know, every once in a while you have someone that wants to try that. But they just basically show land. If I'm in the classroom and they're drawing it by hand, I have them use, you know, as a color for that. And then, you know, they kind of color it in, the rest of it in, you know, typically blue, right? This is the hydrosphere. So that has to do with, obviously all the water that's on the Earth's surface. And sometimes they'll draw little waves and things like that. And then we get to the biosphere. We talk about those, you know, the prefix there, bio, meaning life. And so it's everything that's living. So, you know, typically they'll draw some kind of plants and animals, maybe some fish, maybe a human, little stick figure standing there or something. Very, very simple drawing. And then the last one is kind of this blanket around the Earth itself, and that represents the atmosphere. And again, we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But so we think about how we interact with, like I said, with our soil, with the lithosphere, the Earth's surface, with the water, how we interact with it. Are the plants and animals that are in our environment. And then obviously our atmosphere, what are we doing? How do we use it? And what do we do to it? So those were it. And believe it or not, it's one of those things, kind of like when they're drawing those 4 lines for the regions in North America, that when they draw this simple you know, sphere or this example of the 4 different spheres, and they're all put together like that. Even some of my kids that struggled with, you know, understanding definitions and being able to describe it well, they can draw a picture and they can tell you what's on their picture. And so it definitely shows me that if they are struggling with some literacy skills, they are still able to let you know that they understand these 4 different spheres. Mm-hmm. And then we also go into, I think Carol's going to talk about that, where we go into what we do, how do we modify these different spheres. And I think that's the end of it. Yeah. So I think you were going to show some examples. So I'm going to stop sharing, Carol. And then you can...
I'll unmute and then I'll go to the share screen. Okay, so that should be working. And let me go down here.
We are not seeing anything, Carol.
Can you see anything yet?
We are not.
Okay, let's try this again. So share screen. How's that?
That'll work.
Okay. And we'll try this. I just have to double click instead of 1 click. Okay. Andrea was just showing you. I'm starting with Andrea's slide. You can see it okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay. I am going to look into some modifications that people have made. For the sake of time, it is important what Andrea said. people have definitely made positive changes to the environment. We have lots of agricultural land in southern Michigan, especially because people cut down trees, which want to come back. But there are lots of positive and negative consequences. I kind of like this picture because this was before COVID. This drawing might suggest that there are some problems with the smoke that's coming out of the industrial or smokestacks here, but there can also be positive consequences of having industries. Good heavens, you know, we depend on an automobile industry that uses electricity, that employs lots of people, but we are going to think about if we have industries, especially what we call smokestack industries, what can we do about positive and negative consequences? And here's an example of a power plant that is just wonderful for producing electricity. Great positive consequences. If that power plant burns coal, we're going to see that there could be some negative consequences from that. One effect of burning, whether it's the exhaust that comes out of car tailpipes or burning that comes out of power plants and is putting particles, smoke, sulfur dioxide into the air. Let me go back. One of the negative consequences is called smog, which is a combination of the word smoke and fog. And it just does not look real crisp or clear. And that is not West Michigan fog in the early morning. This is smoke particles hanging in the air, and they can be very irritating to people's lungs. In California, and here's a bottom picture, California has a lot of cars, especially in the Los Angeles area. And California decided smog is not good for us. So it has some of the strongest laws in the United States to produce the kind of exhaust emissions that come out of car and truck and bus tailpipes. The top picture is a photo of smog in Beijing, China. Large cities in India have the same problem. Beijing is notorious for burning a lot of coal to produce electricity. In northern China, using a lot of coal for industries, having a lot of automobiles, just like in California's large cities. And the air becomes dangerous, where people are advised at least to wear masks, but even better to stay indoors. So that was some examples of modifying atmosphere. And I think you're noticing that I'm not being real controversial. I think lots of people who live in Western Michigan, for example, could say, well, you know, I can see that people have put things into the atmosphere. We're going to move to the biosphere and the lithosphere, kind of the shape of the land, the biosphere, what plants are growing on the land, for example. And there are some absolutely wonderful positive consequences. This is just the most beautiful picture of what people have done to this hillside in Asia. What was steep, they built terrace steps so that they can grow crops on a place that would be very hard to grow crops. It took years and years of labor to build the terraces. Each terrace catches water and keeps it from running downhill so that the plants that are inside that particular level, that stair step, can be nourished and grow. And in the meantime, we don't have water running down this steep hill and causing gullies and tearing away the soil. I'd like to take us back, though, to the United States and some farming practices that had unexpected results. Do you remember how Andrea and Sharon had showed you grasslands? Well, if you go to North Dakota and Montana, for example, South Dakota too, you will see grasslands that have been turned into huge fields for growing wheat. And what farmers had to do was remove the original grass in this part of, remember what we called the arid West? They literally plowed up the grassland in order to plant a grass, wheat, that is great for humans to use its seeds for making bread. So this kind of harks back to what's in your wagon. And we'll go on and see what happened. Farmers had plowed up the arid West, at least portions of the arid West, and in parts, especially, I don't know if you remember where there was a number 3 on the US map, and people could choose to go to that panhandle of Oklahoma, which is right close to Texas and right close to Kansas. That became an unusually dry place in the arid West. There was a drought in the 1930s. Now, people had plowed up the soil. There no longer was grass in place to hold the soils in place. The bare soils were plowed up, and in the drought, nothing was growing, and the bare soils blew away. And they have these classic pictures of huge dust storms during the years of the Dust Bowl, this extraordinary drought in a place with no grass cover anymore. In the past, in a drought, the grass would go dormant, but its roots would still be in place, and you wouldn't get the tremendous blowing of soils that happened in the time that's called the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. So people never intended this to happen, but sometimes we don't realize when we make a modification that other things like drought will be worse than we expect, and we get terrible consequences. Next, I'm going to look real quickly at modifications of water. Certainly, we have some activities where students can go and look at plastic pollution in water if they'd like to, but I wanted to look at something closer to home. And here's Michigan, and here's Lake Erie, just touching a small portion of Michigan. We're going to look at things called algae blooms in Lake Erie. I'm sorry, here's Lake Erie, yeah. And this is a satellite image. It's a NASA satellite image from 2017. And normally, if the water is dark like this on the satellite image, that means it's pretty clear. It doesn't have algae scum growing on the surface of it. But notice what's happening near Toledo. That greenness is an algae bloom, which was seen by the satellite. It caused Toledo to shut off its water intake. Toledo gets its water from Lake Erie, and it could no longer do that. People just couldn't get water for several days. It's like, would you want to drink that? How are algae blooms harmful? Well, they make scum that has a terrible odor. Drinking water smells and tastes bad. When the algae decompose, because they're little tiny microscopic plants, they use up the oxygen in the water, and then you get fish dying because the fish don't have enough oxygen. The worst cases, some of the algae can produce toxins that are poisonous to people and to dogs, for example. What causes algae blooms? Well, nobody intends to produce algae blooms, but I'm going to point to this corner is the Maumee River, which flows into Lake Erie. And there are farmers who just mean to be farming. That's all they intend to do. But they add fertilizers to their fields. And when water runs off their fields into streams that flow into the Maumee River, and the Maumee River flows into Lake Erie, if they've used too much fertilizer, or if their cattle are too close to the streams that flow into the river, that flow into Lake Erie, we can get algae blooms in Lake Erie. Not only farmers, but if people live on towns whose streams flow into the Maumee River or other rivers that flow into Lake Erie, if there's any sewage coming from the town, or if there is too much fertilizer that people put on their lawns or that people put on their golf courses, this is feeding the growth of algae blooms. People are working on, especially farmers along the Maumee River, are working to decrease the algae blooms. They're being way careful about measuring how much fertilizer they put on their land, for example. Another story that we could go into, but I have trouble finding non-copyrighted pictures. But if students are concerned about another kind of water contamination, there certainly are references to PFAS that can be looked into. So that's, let's see, gotta check here. Okay, so I think what I've just showed you is pretty not controversial. I'm gonna take you to our introduction to climate change. And Andrea and Sharon really helped me try to phrase this. So let me show you. When I read our local newspaper, MLive, MLive does not like to talk about climate change. Although it certainly recognizes that people have questions and opinions about how the physical environment changes. We're just there. The newspaper, for example, is really cautious about talking about what people do to the environment, or could people have caused changes in physical environments? And so one way I thought we could ease into something that's controversial is to say, well, what do people say to poll takers? And in 2019, something called the Pew Research Center asked US adults if they thought the federal government was doing too little to protect water quality of streams and rivers and lakes. And I have a feeling if people were living in Toledo and had gone without being able to use water for several days, they would have an opinion about this. Or is the federal government doing too little to protect air quality? Maybe people in California would have an opinion about that. Or is the federal government doing too little to reduce the effects of global climate change? And our question is, how do you think people answered? Do you think more than half the people said, yes, I think the federal government is doing too little? Well, would you like to see what they found out? 68% in 2019 said, yes, I think the federal government is doing too little to protect the water quality. Or 67% said, well, maybe it's doing too little to protect air quality. Or even 67% said maybe it should be doing more to reduce the effects of global climate change. So we'll look a little, I don't know if this is surprising. Another poll by CBS, also in 2019, asked people, do you think climate change is a serious problem? Not a problem at all. Or how much does human activity contribute to climate change? And, are people going to say a lot, or are they going to say not at all, or in between? And we asked the students to predict what they think people said. For climate change, 64% in 2019 said, it might be a crisis or a serious problem. How much does human activity contribute to climate change? 44% said a lot. So this is not as high, but 27% said some. And I'll have to leave it to you whether this is something that would work with your students. Certainly Andrea and Sharon helped me phrase this a whole lot better. I think I'm still being pretty non-confrontational when I make the statement human activities do matter. And when I ask, what fuels do people use to power the vehicles that bring students to school every day or used to bring students to school every day? Or what fuels do people use to keep homes warm in the cold months and cool in the warm months? And we can ask about people. There are things we want. We want electricity. And oh my goodness, I could easily name 6 things that I would love to have plugged in every day. And I have way more than 6 things plugged in. We like electricity. And the question becomes, how do we produce electricity? What fuel do we use to produce electricity? The dirtiest fuel, the one that puts most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, this atmosphere that the kids drew on their diagrams. CO2 is, we will talk more about CO2, but I actually think many people will agree that coal puts the most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we need to talk next about, well, why does it matter having carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? This is a quotation from NASA, but also from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Fossil fuel burning increases heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's atmosphere and raises the Earth's average surface temperature. And I don't know if this is being too controversial, but federal government agencies over and over say something similar. I was around. I used to visit my uncle's farms in Nebraska in the arid West, and they actually, to cook and to stay warm in winter, they used to burn corn cobs and coal because they didn't have a whole lot of trees. Now, my aunt's old iron stove did not look this yucky, but even in my lifetime, people were using this kind of contraption to cook. But it produced much less CO2, even though they were burning a fuel. In 2020, Americans produce colossally more CO2. We just have a lot of daily activities, whether it's in factories or homes or schools or transportation, that are burning fuels. Coal is a very dirty fuel. It emits the most carbon dioxide, and we'll learn more about carbon dioxide. Natural gas, which is quite plentiful nowadays, thanks to something called fracking. Natural gas is a much cleaner fossil fuel, and heaven knows we all like to have a cooked supper. There are some non-fossil fuel ways to produce electricity. Where I am in Kalamazoo, Western Michigan University uses a lot of solar panels, although on a cloudy day, they're not such a great idea because they need the sun. When I traveled exactly a year ago, from Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, I saw in rural areas wind turbine after wind turbine after wind turbine. This is a way to produce electricity, although it's kind of a problem if the wind isn't blowing. But in much of the Midwest, the wind blows much of the time. So hopefully that has not been too controversial. I'm getting more controversial, okay?
So Carol, while you're switching screens, one of our other literature pieces is A River Ran Wild, and it's pretty well a picture book. There are words in it, but they're very, very minimal. You'll have a page to read, a picture. You could do this on screen, a full screen. I used to do it using our overhead and put it up on the screen, but it's basically showing students the change from prior any population or minimal population in an area of a river where it became very populated and how the river changed over time. It's a simple read, it's a simple example, but it falls in line with what we're talking about. And then we come to the present, which is even beyond the book.
Okay, I'm going to take you a little step along in being controversial. And it's like, are temperatures rising? Is the US getting warmer? And, I'm 75 going on 76, and I remember winter being much colder, so maybe some of the students' grandparents remember colder winters. is the Earth getting warmer? And we're just going to look at some highlights of how you might answer this question. I was struck by how important measuring temperature is. It's just hard to ignore that we really do have to take our temperatures now during a pandemic. This way of measuring temperature for a person isn't a very big instrument. What I wanted to lead into that the US government has been measuring temperatures since 1870. This is important. It's like, how would we know if things are getting warmer? We have to have measurements. NOAA, NOAA, is a government department. It's all spelled out, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Its predecessor and then its predecessor has been around since 1870. NOAA has 900 weather stations, many of them at airports, for example, that kind of automatically record wind and temperature and precipitation 24 hours a day. Massive amounts of data collected, but it's important to note for more than 100 years. I need to say that there are government agencies that we depend upon, like NOAA. It has to take measurements so that every forecast that we see on local television has an underpinning of the measurements that NOAA took. NASA, which we think about for space flights and satellites, but it works hand in hand, its scientists work hand in hand with NOAA, because part of its duties are to study, often from way above and with satellites, to study the Earth's weather and climate. We truly have a lot invested by the federal government in gathering information. And we'll try to look just real quickly, are parts of the US getting warmer? Are parts of the world getting warmer? This was a fairly simple map. This was made by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They put their logo on it, and it compares present day 2020 temperatures in the United States. It has these regions. See how there are region lines within Michigan. It has these regions, and it's trying to say, when we look at the long-term average temperature, that because we know what temperatures were very well, very accurately since 1895, when we compare present day to the long-term average, notice how much of the United States looks like, I'm not sure I want to retire to Florida. There are parts of Florida that are just record warmest temperatures. This is all about 2020 compared to the previous average. There are chunks of the United States that are much above average and some that are slightly above average. Real quickly, if we look at places in the world, NASA has a 30-second animation that shows temperatures from 1880 through 2019. That's more than 100 years. Even 30 seconds seems a little long when they're going through 100 years. The places that are colored blue on the Earth, at the time, and this happens to be 1886 to 1890, the places that are colored blue were lower than the average for these more than 100 years. You're going to see places that are colored red, and their temperatures are higher than the average for the 100 years. And I could take you there. Maybe I should. Oops, what did I just do? Oh dear. Let me just, instead of spending time looking at the animation, when you compare 1886, the earlier times, with the present, do you notice all the reds or the golds? It's almost ironic. It's so strange. Look at where we were back in Russia. Maybe there's hope for Siberian Russia. Maybe more workers will want to go there because it's warmer now than it used to be. The winters aren't quite as bad and the summers are a little bit warmer. In fact, this past year in Russia and in Alaska and northern Canada, it got so warm they had fires, wildfires. Something is going on. This is a little bit hard, and I think sometimes things are controversial because they're complicated. If I can just step you through this graph, notice that it starts in 1880 and it ends close to present. And we've got some blue bars and we've got some red bars, and we'll see what those mean. There's a zero line, and that zero line represents the long-term average temperature for about 100 years. And I don't know if this is too complicated. You sure can tell me and we can take this out. But the red bars, they're all above the average. And are the above average temperatures in the past or in the present? The red bars are all above the long-term average. They're in the 1980s, 90s, 2000 to 2010s, going up to present. And this says that the Earth is getting warmer. So, is that too controversial? I'm going to nose into one more thing. It's the greenhouse effect. Do social studies teachers talk about the greenhouse effect? Well, you'll let me know. Okay. All right. The greenhouse effect is going to be important because one of the greenhouse gases that helps, and it's a good thing, that helps to keep the Earth's surface warm. These are gases in the atmosphere. And I was thinking, these gases are just like COVID. We can't see them, but they're there and they're doing really important things. Greenhouse gases help keep the Earth warm. One very important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, which we had talked about earlier as one of those things that especially power plants that burn coal, we may not be seeing carbon dioxide being given off, but that carbon dioxide is coming out of the smokestacks and going into the atmosphere. A bit about the greenhouse effect. There are an awful lot of greenhouses in Western Michigan around Grand Rapids. Greenhouses have glass walls. They let in lots of sunlight if you have a sunny day. during the daytime, the sunlight goes through the glass walls. And the important thing is that the greenhouse traps the sun's energy. The greenhouse stays warmer. You can have plants growing in a greenhouse in January because what sunlight comes in, or February, March, when it's still cold, too cold outside for flowers, but you can have plants growing because the greenhouse traps the sun's energy. Well, if we go to a wider look at the earth, we have sunlight that is coming, and very importantly, a bunch of that sunlight is absorbed by land and water, by my driveway, by my sidewalk, by my lawn, by my roof. You probably can even figure that Lake Michigan actually gets warm in the summertime. That water is absorbing energy from the sun. There is some sunlight, especially if we have snow. That sunlight gets reflected and it's never absorbed by anything. We get a double whammy of cold in the wintertime when the snow is reflecting the sunlight. But much of sunlight is absorbed by land and water, and they get warmer. There is a bit, now then land and water do something. They give off, kind of like a radiator. They had warmed up, and they, kind of like a radiator, they emit a kind of energy called infrared. Now, that infrared is going away from the land, away from my rooftop, away from the road, away from the water. It's going up into the atmosphere that surrounds the earth. Some of it does escape beyond the atmosphere into outer space. However, and this is really important, this is how the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere do a really nice thing for the earth. They trap heat. This makes us a wonderful, cozy average 59 degrees because the atmosphere is trapping infrared radiation that is coming off the land surfaces that were originally warmed by the sun. The big question that scientists, the vast majority, 97% of scientists are worried about, is whether we have more and more greenhouse gases trapping even more and more heat. And is this a problem? Is this what is contributing to the earth getting warmer, to many places in the United States getting warmer? And some questions that we can ask, are people adding too much CO2 to the atmosphere? Could people think of ways to add less CO2 to the atmosphere so that we can kind of slow down the amount of greenhouse warming that's taking place? The greenhouse effect has been happening for thousands of years. The big recent question is, do humans send greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, into the air faster than nature did in the past? So I think, can I pass this off now to Sharon and Andrea?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
what we're going to be addressing. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to share my screen, Sharon?
Yes, please. So our focus is going to be looking at the carbon dioxide that we use. And probably the largest thing that the students are going to understand and be able to be physically connected with is our automobiles, which we know releases water vapor, but also carbon dioxide. And it's all released through the exhaust pipe. So when our car travels, we are outputting about 5 pounds of carbon dioxide or carbon, excuse me, for every gallon of gas. And we're going to show a NOVA presentation, and they refer to this carbon as car turds. And if the kids have been bored up to this point, they become very involved in it as soon as you start talking about car turds. But for every gallon of gas that is burned, they use car turds. So I would talk to the students about how far they lived from school approximately, and then how far their parents lived from work. So they had to find that out the night before I presented this. And then we actually figured out how many gallons of gas were being burned per day, and figured out how many pounds our classroom were actually emitting. And Roy is saying, you mean the middle school boys? Correct. No, my girls were just as involved in it, Roy. They just like the word of car turd, but probably more giggles from the boys. Can you move me forward? So here's our link. It's only a couple minutes long, but you'll see the visual effect that it gives referring to the car turds. Oh, can you go back, Andrea? Thank you.
Yeah, let me see.
Did you connect the link?
I thought I did.
Good. Looks good.
Yeah.
Many people find it hard to believe that humans are acting as a geologic force, outstripping even volcanoes as a contributor to global climate change. Have you ever thought about how much carbon is in a gallon of gasoline? Let's weigh it and find out. A gallon of gasoline weighs about 6.3 pounds. 87% of that is carbon. And that means there's 5 pounds of carbon in a gallon of gasoline. Think of that like a 5-pound bag of charcoal briquettes. When you burn gasoline, you create carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide is an odorless, invisible gas. And think about this. What if the carbon came out of your tailpipe not as carbon dioxide, but as solid chunks of carbon? Kind of like car turds. So if the average American car gets around 25 miles to the gallon, that means that every 25 miles, you're dumping 5 pounds of car turds out your tailpipe. The average mileage for each car is about 12,000 miles a year. So that releases over a ton of carbon. In the US, there are a total of about 100 million cars on the road, releasing about 330,000 tons of carbon per day. When we include the rest of the world's 1 billion cars, we reach 3 million tons of car turds every day. And that's just cars. When we add in power plants, factories, aviation, and agriculture, and multiply it by 365, the total carbon released by human activities in a year is a massive 12.5 billion tons, enough to leave a pile of car turds 4 miles across and over a mile high.
So as you can see, it's a short and sweet video, but it really starts to make the kids get a visual effect of what we're talking about if it was a solid.
I think that was, oh, then we had a little bit more to it.
Yeah. So then we go into talking about what countries, now this is, they don't really know anything more than what we've presented. So we have them guess or predict what are the top 3 countries that produce CO2 emissions. And you'll get all kinds of responses. But typically the surprise is when the reveal comes. And our answer is China, US, and India. And so, you know, we'll ask them, what do you know about these countries? In China and India, they always come up with the population. Some of my students have been to 1 or 2 of these countries, and they always bring up the fact, well, they do have a lot of people, but they also walk and use bicycles a lot more than we do in the US. And so right then they start arguing, but population typically wins out. So they typically put US as the 3rd country and are a little surprised to find out the actual order.
But then there's more. Oh, this is the per capita one. Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, no, you can take it.
I just put in the slide that has the answers on it, but then we ask about, you know, those top 3 countries and, you know, who puts out the most amount per person. And so again, they're expecting China because again, they have the most number of people in that. Yeah. However, when we go to and reveal the answers in that, they can see, and then we talk about what is it about the different countries, their culture, their lifestyles, where even though we're not producing as much in terms of the overall amount, but when we break it down to our activities, what we have access to, and how that drives up the percentage, the number of people that, or the, you know, per person capita that produce this CO2. So, you know, it's just another one of those things that we're looking at the data, we're trying to just ask more questions. I don't want to beat them over the head with a lot of data, but want to get them to spark some inquiry and look at, you know, what is happening in our country, what is happening in other places around the world. And, you know, and then eventually we get to the point of, you know, what can be done about it. I think they're, you know, yeah. So then this is a great little website that we found. And this is the Carbon Story. They have a couple other things, but I think it's a great opportunity for kids to explore a little bit. When I push this out, I will go through and I will take them through the first part of it. And then I'll give them an opportunity to explore. So it basically talks about back in time, what is our human impact on the environment as far as, you know, carbon. So there's the graphics, the timeline down below. Here we are. What's happening? It's, you know, it's not a lot of text or reading, and it's just another way to present the information.
But I think the graphics help them to understand the year that we're in.
Yeah, it kind of gives them that frame of mind of what the time period is and the setting, so to speak, for this story and how we move through it. Again, we don't have to go through all of it, but you know, we get into the industrial era and then eventually the Industrial Revolution that comes up. They see some familiar faces. And we make it, you know, through this. I'll just kind of click through it. And while we're clicking through this, I don't know if you've noticed, but this again is the kind of the gauge of the human impact on the environment. So
I think there's also a gauge over on the right of the screen, like my pictures of everybody attending the meeting have blocked it out.
Yeah. So if we if we move this down a little bit, human impact so far. Because they like watching that thing go up, you know, and here we get into some of the mass transportation. Everybody's on the road now. Talks about the, you know, agencies, international cooperation to address it. So this is where we're at. So this gets them into the 2000s, you know, and then they can take a look at what's happening and look at a lot of information. Who produces it? Where does it go? They kind of like watching that. This is interesting. The graph that shows where we're at. So here we are. Well, this was updated in 2012, but you can then, the students can then go through and kind of predict if we continue at this rate, what is going to happen. So let's say, for instance, kind of reminds me of another graph that keeps going up. Then you can go ahead and see what the consequences are. You've chosen this scenario. And so this is what a potential impact will be for oceans. Again, we look at these different spheres. What's happening to the environment on land, and then also the earth or the atmosphere.
Yeah, my last few years teaching, I always had students asking, because they would hear the news about we're going to lose Florida due to storms, or California. And I think this is going to make a real impact when they start making these predictions, and now they're starting to see cities and land underwater.
Yeah, and again, they can kind of be in charge of, you know, what that's going to look like if,
Right.
you know, different, you know, cooperation and different effects occur. You know, what is the impact and how much has it been? You know, they can do a comparison of worst case scenario and best case scenario and that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's it's out there. We have it linked in the presentation, or the Google or the Giants presentation. So you can kind of go through and explore and see some of the different things that that makes kids think about the future, as well as, you know, what's happened in the past.
Right.
So, and that's pretty much it for me and for what we
Right.
were going to present.
Right.
I think we were going to leave it open for questions in that and comments. So, Carol, is there anything else that you want to
Address?
connect with? And
I'm good. If you have questions or comments, or if you just reflect for a couple of days and just let us know. I have revised and revised about anything about global climate change. And I don't think we can ignore it.
No.
Just like I don't think we can ignore COVID. But we have to be kind of respectful of it's complicated. How do we ease people into something that's complicated? And just like COVID, we can't see it. Except if you live long enough like me, you might think it is a little warmer.